This is a student support video where I help a student fix some problems virtually in real time as if I was in class with them. It'll probably seem very boring to most viewers, but hopefully it shows you how I troubleshoot in Maya and fix some common problems. As it is unscripted and mostly unedited, it will seem much longer than my normal tutorials. This video will focus on using the quad draw tool to create metal plating on a spherical surface and why that's better than moving vertices or multi-cutting new edges into an existing sphere. In this video, I'm going to help a student with some of her Year 12 coursework. She's asked me to help her create her robot eye here. So she wants to know how to create sort of these angled grooves along the edge of the eyeball. They're not in straight lines that could easily be extruded from the edge loops on an existing sphere. They sort of have these S shapes in them. She's sent me a 3D model of what she's done so far, and she's got like these cables that go around the eyeball, which look great. I like the way they sort of tie up at the bottom there. But we need to sort of have these sitting and say aside some kind of recess to allow for smooth turning or protection or whatever like that. So I'm going to show you how I would create these sort of panels like I have here. So to answer your question as quick as possible, I'm going to show you the sort of wrong way of, or the traditional way of doing it and the better way of doing it. So usually I would just simply click on the sphere that you want to use to create the panels on, and instead of extruding it, I would go to make it into a live surface up here with the magnet. I would go over to the modeling toolkit over here with the hammer and the cube. I would click on the quad draw tool. I have another tutorial on how to use this tool properly, but in short, click on quad draw and all of the shortcuts for the quad draw are listed down here where it says keyboard and mouse shortcuts. And because this P sphere is what is currently active, I can move a mouse over it and actually create new vertices along this. So I can start to outline the edge of a piece of panel around here like that. When you're using the quad draw tool, you are obviously making things quads, you're making squares. So every time you have lines going along the side here, you need to have another row of them like this. To fill them in, you hold shift. So you just click with your mouse to create new dots. You hold shift and click in between them to create new geometry. And that is how I would pretty much go around doing the whole thing. Just quickly, I'm going to show you the way that most of my students would attempt to do this, just to show you the problems, and then you'll see the advantages of doing it in the way I just showed you there. So here is the way that most students do it. First of all, I'd recommend turning the eyeball so that the poles are at the front like that. And this is the kind of the wrong way of doing it, but you'll see why it's an issue. So you would get that and you'll realize that there's no way you're going to be able to realistically move these edges around without distorting the shape of the geometry. So if I want to move this sort of edge loop down and this one down, before you know it, you're changing the silhouette of the sphere, so it's not as spherical as it should be as you try to make these go down so that it's easier to extrude. So what you have to do when moving the vertices, if you're going to do it this way, is simply to click on the geometry, go to your hammer and cube tool, modeling toolkit, and do transform constraint, either surface slide or edge slide. I'm going to do surface slide for this one, and move these down. And you could pretty much get away with this, but you are going to lose some information in the middle on the edge of the sphere here. Now you get to the issue over here where you got some edge loops that go up too far, and in this case you kind of have to move them down, and before you know it, you've changed the silhouette of the eyeball so much that it really starts to look a bit sort of haggard over there. So this is one way of doing it, and then basically you would just move the vertices as best as you can like that to make for this panel, and it's just going to get all a bit of a mess and too flat. So, and it doesn't really help for if these cables were to kind of go around back on themselves. It would be such a mess of faces to do that. But basically you could go to extrude them up. So the other thing students might do to have full control over where the edges are without worrying about edges flattening out because you're moving the edges too far away from each other is to go to the multi-cut tool. And this tool, you can actually create new lines on your geometry and easily trace like a trench area that you'd like to leave behind here. And this tool will actually go through slice through other edges like that, which is really cool. And it all looks pretty good in the hood like that. You go around there and think, hey, that's fine. And I'll go around and go to face mode. I'm going to hold down tab on the keyboard. I'm holding tab to paint select all of the faces that I'd like to extrude up into a panel like this. So in some situations this may work really well. This is not one of them. Go to extrude once you've selected them and find the blue arrow, always the blue arrow, and pull that up like this. Okay, so it looks all fine there. It kind of looks like a piece of paneling that goes up. That would work. However, when you hit 3 on the keyboard, weird things start to happen. So 3 is obviously for smoothing. And if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to put mine in a game, I don't need to smooth this. You do, because someone eventually is going to have to go to mesh, smooth, or mesh reduce if you're going to do graphical settings in a game, and you're going to have issues because you've got faces here that have more than 4 sides. This face here, if I isolate your geometry, this face here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides, and it's not going to be happy when you try to put it in game engines and isolate that. You can see when you do the smooth preview with 3 on the keyboard, there's areas that look quite sharp, and then there's areas that sort of blob out for no reason at all. And you get to like where you have intersections of triangles and stuff, and it looks absolutely nasty like this. There's creases and pinches, and you do not have control of this shape in the way that you should. So this isn't an effective way of doing it. The best way I can possibly think of is to do what I showed you at the beginning, which is the quad draw tool. So let's do this properly now. So I'm going to click on the eyeball like that. It's sort of got this weird flowery shape at the front because this isn't smooth yet. I'm pretty sure you're okay to hit 3 on that and then convert it into a live surface. Don't forget, once it's live, you can't click on it anymore or move it. You have to unlive your live surface for it to work. So I've clicked on the magnet. I've gone to my modeling toolkit with the hammer and cube, and I'm going over to where it says quad draw, and I'm going to start putting down some dots. Now, if you put dots down in the wrong place, to remove them, as it says down here in the keyboard mouse shortcuts area, it's Control Shift and then click to remove a dot. If you make a mistake, everything's in there that I'm doing. And you can also see my shortcuts should be showing up there too. All right, then let's go. So I'm going to go around here and just try and trace the edge of this geometry like that. I would try and keep this as low poly as possible, and it's very easy to smooth out later on. I'm just going to have an edge like that there, and try and match the same number of dots on each side, or you're going to have a hard time. So I'm just visually lining up these dots, trying to think what would connect to what. You can see now I'm struggling down here to fit these last 3 in. If you want to move one because you've made a mistake, that's no problem. It's very intuitive. So obviously you can't just connect these up like that. You'd end up creating a flat plane instead of a curved plane. So you're going to have to do some more dots in between. So I'm just going to have another row here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one down there in the middle, 6. This one in the middle, 7. This one down there to 8. And then obviously just 1 down there. Right, let's start filling these in now so it actually starts to make sense. I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard, which allows you to join them all up. Now, it might get a bit triangle-y sometimes. And if that happens, you may need to add an extra row, which gives you a higher chance of getting squares or quads in. Otherwise, it does some weird shapes. I seem to be okay if I move my mouse to the exact middle of some of these quads that I've laid out here, like that. So I'm going to just try and join these up as best as I can. And because these are all quads, we're not going to have the issues when we extrude later on, where some things are really sort of edges are soft and others edges are really hard. It will all work perfectly because it's all quads. And it will subdivide, meaning that it will work in level of detail settings in game engines and stuff. So if you're looking at the edge of this and you're thinking that looks really low poly, like from an N64 game, don't worry. You can add an edge loop in here. As it says somewhere over here, to add an edge loop, you hold Control on the keyboard. And watch what happens. If you add Control to add your new edge loop in here, it adds it and automatically sort of bulges the geometry out to match with the contours of the sphere underneath that you've got there. So you can just hold Control and throw in a whole bunch more edge loops. Don't go too wild. You can add more detail later on. And then you can go in and start fixing some problems. So down here, it looks a little bit nasty. So I'm just going to kind of move those out like this. I could see here, I could do with a bit of extra geometry to inform that circle. I'm going to hold Control, click for a new edge loop, drag that down to there. Maybe over here as well. Control, Control, and this should be nicer like that. Great. That's pretty much done. So to treat this as normal geometry now and to come out of this tool, if you go to your cursor tool at the top, you'll see that kind of takes it away from there. You also need to turn off the magnet tool now. You must turn this off before you try and extrude this, or you're going to have a bad time. So click on the magnet there, and it says no life surface anymore, which is great. So this is its own shape now. It can do what it wants. I'd recommend doing CP for center pivot, so that's on there. That's a modify center pivot if it's not on your shelf for some weird reason. And let's extrude this out. So go to face mode and literally select all of the faces. Just drag select all of the faces on that geometry. Hit the extrude button on your shelf. It's mesh extrude if you can't find it. And then find the blue arrow. It will look really gnarly for a minute, but don't worry. Find the blue arrow and pull that out in this direction like that. And that's looking pretty good. And obviously you can see all the angles on the geometry here like that. To remove those and to make it look smoother, you could obviously hit 3, but we'll do that later. It looks a bit too blobby at the moment. But to get rid of these sort of straightish lines here, click on the geometry and go to Mesh Display. I'm in the modeling toolkit modeling menu here. Go to Mesh Display and go to Soften/Harden Edges, and it will automatically calculate which edges to keep sharp, like on the edges here, and which ones to keep smooth, like the ones on the surface. So now that you've extruded this, if there's any areas that you kind of wish you changed, like if I wish these vertices were higher up a bit, now's probably not the good time to edit that, because by moving these, you are going to, again, distort the overall silhouette of your geometry and can cause all sorts of problems. So it's always best to make sure you check your shape while it's flat before you extrude it, because you've kind of got to live with it then, or be very careful when you do your tweaks. And I'm going to speed through the next one and speed up time hopefully on this. So I'll click the sphere, click on the magnet, go to quad draw, use these tips down here for help. Now I usually like to try and make sure I have a roughly similar number of edge loops on my pieces of geometry just for uniformity. So if you turn on wireframe on shaded on your shelf just up here, this shows you the edge loops that you've already got, and they can maybe help you put your new ones in and line them up. And just be really careful to try and copy the same number of edge loops from the top over to the middle. You can always fix it later. And then when you're ready, hold shift to fill them in. It gets quite difficult when they are really far apart and you get these narrow rectangles to work with, but you can always add more vertices if you need. So I can see that these faces are going through the geometry. It doesn't look very good at all. So hold control and just flesh that out like this, and now it's a lot more spherical, which works well. I'm going to go around and correct the geometry here as it's not how I intended. Just make sure it sort of fits with the flow of the cable like that. Don't worry about having all of these lines flat. If you need to move them across like this, it's absolutely no problem at all. Now you'll notice that some of my, if I just kind of make this worse for a second like that and just do some really gnarly stuff. If you've got geometry that looks really sort of skew like this, you can hold shift on the keyboard, which will relax your geometry. So you can just hold shift and just drag along, and it just relaxes it so that the mesh just looks a lot more professional, and it's always going to keep this on the surface of the sphere as you're doing so. So it works really well, and it's quite a satisfying thing to do as well, just relax your geometry out. It only works, oh no, it works like that as well. So you can get these nice average curves going on, and it just looks good like that. If you do it on the edges, sometimes things get a bit too far away. You might need to put them back in their place like that. Great, let's convert this into real geometry. So turn off the magnet, go to object mode, go to face. I've got both objects selected here. I have to go to object mode and just click away. Oh no, I'm still in the quad draw mode. I'm still putting dots anywhere randomly. So undo, and go back to my selection tool, or which is Q for Quebec on the keyboard. Great. So you've got your geometry here. I'm going to center pivot that just because I want to. And then I'm going to go to face mode. Be very careful to right click on the face that you can actually see. If you right click on the face of one of these darker bits, that'll be for the guide sphere underneath. Double click to select all the faces, or drag select all the faces, hit extrude, find the blue arrow and extrude them up to there. Great. So We now need to work out how to make these look good when they're smoothed. I'm now going to turn off my wireframe on shaded. I'm going to click on my geometry here. I can see it looks a little bit angled, so I'm going to click on that. I'm going to do mesh display just to clarify what the differences are. If I do harden edge, all the edges are hardened. If I do soften edge, it softens out these edges here, which sometimes on the sides it looks really weird. You get this horrible sort of black and white effect. And if you do mesh display, soften / harden edges, it's perfect. Anything that's kind of near 90 degrees is a hard edge. Anything less than that seems to be soft. Great. So I'm going to do that on both of them. Soften / harden edges, and you're good. So now when I hit 3 to smooth this, it looks far too bubbly, and it's just not good. So like you can see over here, it just looks like Play-Doh or blue tack's been sort of molded over the edge of this here. So let's give this a beveling. So we need to select only the 90-degree edges to bevel. You do not want to select the whole object and bevel it, as quite a lot of students want to do, because although it bevels these edges really nicely, it also bevels everything else, meaning that even though it's smoothed, you can see like the polygons that make it up, because they're all doubled up. So I'm going to undo a few times there and try that again. So I'm going to go to edge mode, and we're going to go around and select the edges along the edge of this here. So you want all the 90-degree edges and sharp corners to be beveled. So that's like a 90-degree corner. Essentially, I double click along the edge, and where that edge ends, so you can see here, this edge has come to an end there. It didn't continue along here like I would kind of hope it would. That means it's reached a T-junction, and it doesn't know to go that way or that way. I actually want it to do both. So I'll double click, double click, double click. And make sure you have all the edges on the underside as well. You may want to do isolate select just to make sure you've got everything, or you can hit 4 on the keyboard, but that's just too much for my brain to handle. Good, I've got them all, and let's give that a beveling. So you're going to go to edit mesh bevel. Mine's on the shelf up here, and we're going to drag the fraction down there like that. If the one from the shelf doesn't give you this tool, just go to edit mesh bevel from the menu. I'll show you how to fix that another day. And I would usually, let's just give it 2 segments. The reason I like to give it the bevels 2 segments is this. With one segment, you end up with a small triangle here. And triangles aren't my best friend. They're not my enemy like 5-sided shapes are. But to avoid triangles, if you just increase segments to 2, you have just doubled your poly count, obviously, but you also avoid having triangles, and it's you can always reduce things later on. Great. And then you go to object mode. Now, when you hit 3, you can see this is much better. So the geometry along the top's perfectly smooth, and we've still got these nice hard edges along the side, but they are beveled, and you can see this lovely highlight going across there. If I just sign like a Fong, if you sign like a shiny Fong material to it instead of a Lambert, you should see it better. So if I sign a new material, I sign a Fong, you might just see it be a little bit more shiny on there. And you can see the comparison of having beveled geometry versus unbeveled geometry. It's night and day. It looks much better. Another quick way of selecting the edges along the side is to go to edge mode, and instead of trying to go through and select all these sort of one by one almost, is to do the inverse. And it's actually easier to just hold down shift and double click on all of your latitude and longitudinal lines like this, and just select all those and completely ignore the edge ones. So I'm ignoring all the ones on the edge here, all the ones on the edge there. I'm ignoring all that. I'm just doing the ones in between. That was much quicker. Then I hold shift, drag select over all of that shape, and I've left with the ones on the corners like that. So that's much quicker. Bevel, segments 2, fraction down a bit, object mode, hit 3, great. If this is going into a computer game, you might then want to commit to doing mesh, smooth, and you can smooth that down like that as well, which is like a permanent way of hitting 3. And you've now got nice grooves for the cables to go in.